Well, hello, everyone. I am so excited to bring Atherton Drent here to you. She is an author of the book called Intuitive Dance, Building, Protecting, and Clearing Your Energy and Following Your Body Wisdom. She is also a contributing author to the Amazon best-selling book, 365 Moments of Grace. Atherton has been featured on numerous radio shows and is a regular contributor editor for the Paradigm Pages newsletter. Atherton also appears in the documentary Voyage to Betterment as one of 12 experts, along with other internationally renowned physicians, researchers, and pioneers in the field of consciousness, research, and spirituality. Atherton is a clairvoyant, medical intuitive, and holistic energy practitioner, facilitating transformational healing for her clients. She has been extensively trained and certified as a medical, intuitive, and holistic energy practitioner. She has been in private practice since 2000 and has conducted over 35,000 healing balances on clients from around the world. That is amazing accomplishments. She is also a compassionate teacher committed to helping others develop their full intuitive potential through yearly workshops, and she has a private practice in Ottawa, Ontario. Today, we have the honor of having her here to share her near-death experience that radically changed her life, and how she was saved by a young healer who encouraged her to train with him. After she had completed her training, she had left a high-paying corporate job with benefits and pension to pursue a career in the healing arts. I'm excited to dig in and hear about her story today and her journey to this healing path and how she's made such an immense impact in the world already as she's made that shift. Because being in corporate, how long were you in corporate for, Atherton?
I was in corporate for about almost 10 years. And prior to that, I was a registered medical technologist. I had worked in hospitals and private labs. And I'd also worked as a consultant for the lab industry. And I would be an efficiency expert. I'd go into doctors' offices and hospitals and assess how they were managing things and then make suggestions. And I ran a hospital lab for a short period of time as they were transitioning through a renovation until they could get a hospital hired lab manager. So yeah, it was a very varied career.
Yeah, lots of variety by the sounds of it as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about this near-death experience that made you make this shift from all of the wonderful things that you were even doing in corporate. Because even some people think, oh, I was in corporate, it was just this mundane job. I just went, like I didn't came home. But yours sounds exhilarating, and how you were able to still interact with so many amazing professionals and make such an impact and help bringing stability into their practices, right?
Yes. Well, and it was interesting because the last 2.5 years that I was in corporate, I had made a rather large shift in the fact that I had started working for a government branch, and I ended up writing their policy and procedure manuals in crop insurance. And, how does a city girl who has a background in lab science end up working for the government writing training manuals and policy and procedures for a crop insurance company? But it was a very, I always felt that it was a very God-directed direction that my life had taken, especially in the last 10 years, and how I ended up into corporate positions. And it was the best job I ever had. I loved that job, and I had great bosses. I loved my staff. I loved everybody I worked with, and it was just, I really felt like I'd come home. So I was very happy because I thought, well, I'm set now. I'm in my 40s and I've got this really amazing job and I don't have to commute that far and I have a pension and I have benefits. And I just thought this is amazing. And yet during that whole time, I was getting sicker and sicker and sicker. I had never been a very healthy person. I'd always struggled with migraines. And then my last 10 years of working in corporate, I developed severe insomnia. So I went from having to sleep anywhere from 10 to 14 hours a day to, if I got 2 hours of sleep a day, it was a miracle. I mean, it made me a star in the corporate world because, you know, I show up at, you know, I was up all night. So I'd get all my paperwork done. I'd show up for work at 7 o'clock in the morning. I was always the first one in the office and last one out. It got to be a competition between me and the CEO to see who was going to be the last person out. And yet during all this time, I'm losing weight. I'm getting weak. I'm fighting with my doctor. I'm telling her repeatedly, there's something wrong with me. She keeps saying that I'm faking it, that it's all in my head. And she kept trying to put me on all these kinds of medications. I never took any of them because I just knew in my heart that what she was saying to me wasn't right. And we were missing something. And I had over 30 years of my life, because I was not that healthy and I had all these migraines, and they were really horrible aura migraines. So I would lose my vision. I wouldn't be able to hear. I wouldn't be able to use my hands. I'd be very weak on the right side. It could take me weeks to recover after them.
Wow.
And, you know, it had an impact on our lives, but, you know, I still managed to get married and have 2 kids and, you know, and I just remember one day I passed out at work and I woke up in a merge. And the doctors just said I was suffering from extreme anxiety and I needed to take a couple of weeks off of work. And up to that point, because my migraines were starting to escalate, and I wasn't, because I had this pattern of having them every 3 months, and now I was having at least one a week.
Wow.
And I remember it was in the spring of '99, and the migraines started happening every week. And I passed out at work, and somebody brought me home. And I remember when I got home, walking through the door and I just falling to my knees and just saying, God, I can't do this anymore. You know, like I have this amazing job and, you know, my husband travels all the time and we have these 2 amazing kids who are in high school and I'm going to lose my job and I'm going to lose my joy and my happiness. And I just remember falling to my knees and just saying, you have got to do something. You either you either fix this or you take me because I am done. You know, and I'm down on my knees and I'm sobbing. And all of a sudden I hear this knock on the door. And I thought, who's interrupting me as I'm making my lament to God here? And how dare they? And I remember getting up and storming down the hallway and opening up the door and going, what? And there's nobody there. But there's a newspaper sitting on the porch. And I thought, well, that's weird because we don't get the newspaper. And I picked it up and I stormed back down the hallway and I threw it down on the kitchen table. And the newspaper did something that I didn't know newspapers could do. It landed on its spine and it opened up very carefully to a full-page article about this young man in the town that we lived at the time who did something called cranial sacral work, never heard of it before. And he helped people who suffered from severe migraines. And then I just heard this voice, see him.
Wow.
Fine. Called him up, had an appointment the next day, went to see him, had no idea what cranial sacral was. And he was a lovely, very gentle young man. And over the next 3 weeks, he got my migraines from being completely debilitating to dizzy spells. I mean, I was sold. And every time I went to see him, he would bring up the fact that I needed to go and see this young man by the name of Larry, who did this thing called energy work. Well, I already didn't know what cranial was. And this kid was helping me. And I didn't see why I had to drive 4.5 hours to go and see this guy who did this thing called energy work. And I kept refusing to go. And he would bring it up and I would keep refusing to go. Well, now I've collapsed at work. I wake up in the hospital. They send me home. And over the next 6 weeks, I go from not being able to sleep to sleeping 23 hours a day. Wow. And I'm getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And I can't sit up. I'm having to crawl to the bathroom because I can't even stand up. I'm calling the doctor. She says, you're faking it. You just want to stay home. I call my boss and I'm telling him what's going on. My boss calls my doctor and tells her that I'm not faking it. And he wants her to investigate this or he's going to have her investigated. So my husband gets me to the doctor's office and she said, well, maybe you have celiacs. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, I'm trained as a lab tech. And I know that back in the 70s, they said that the way I was trained is celiacs was always diagnosed in the first 4 years of life because it's a failure to thrive. And I didn't have that problem. I was suffering from migraines. I was severely constipated. I weighed 98 pounds. I was a size 0, but I looked like I was 9 months pregnant all the time.
Oh.
And so the doctor finally said, well, and I would ask her for tests. I mean, being a lab tech, I knew that there were certain panels that she could run, and she wouldn't do them. She would always refuse. And we would have these horrific arguments. And so finally she agreed to have me go for a barium test. And I went in for the barium test the next day, and I kept passing out. So they finally put me in one of the change booths, and I would just lay down on the concrete floor and I would sleep after I drunk all this stuff. And I remember the doctor coming to get me, and he put me on the x-ray table and he ran the test and he said, what's going on? And then he said, well, why aren't they running this panel? Because he knew by this time I was a lab tech. And I said, I don't know, she won't do them. And he said, well, what about this panel? She won't do them. Well, what about this panel? She won't do them. Oh,
wow.
So he said, okay, can you? Yeah, I know, it was really frustrating. So then he said, well, I'm going to get you to drink this barium fluid, and I'm going to wait another hour if that's okay with you, because I want to investigate something. So I said, okay, that's fine. So after he ran those tests, he came and he got me, and he took me into his office, and he had all my x-rays up on the wall. And there was this huge white mass in my abdomen.
Oh my word.
And I got really calm. And he says, it's not cancer. And I said, yeah, I know. And he said, but you need to have additional tests. And I said, well, it's not going to happen. She's not going to do them. He said, well, you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to insist that she does it. And I remember I turned to him and I said, look, I used to be a lab tech. I've worked in a hospital. I've worked in a private lab. I know how this works. I know that you guys don't like to tell each other what to do, but I said, if you don't advocate for me, I'm dead. And I just turned and walked away. And the next morning I get a call from the doctor's office and I'm told to come in. My husband brings me in, and the doctor proceeds to scream at me for going over her head. And how dare I insist that this test be done?
Oh my
and
God.
Again, I just got this feeling of calm coming over me. And she said, I'm going to punish you, and I'm going to make you wait 6 months before I will order these tests.
That girl needs to lose her practice. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And I just remember looking at her and I said, well, if I was your daughter, you'd have me in the hospital tomorrow. And I said, and I know how this works because I've worked in a hospital, and I know that you can pull strings. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 2 weeks. And if you don't have me in for this test within 2 weeks, I said, I personally will report you to the board, and I'm going to sue you for malpractice. And she just went pale. And next morning I get a phone call and I'm told that in 2 weeks, I'm going to be taken to a specialist to have this test, and it's going to be done under an anesthetic. I said, okay, fine. So in the meantime, I'm getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And there's this funny smell in this room. And having worked in a hospital, I know that death takes on a particular smell, and nurses talk about it all the time. They always can tell when death is coming because there's this smell. And I could tell that this smell was in the room. And I remember I woke up in the middle of the afternoon one day. And again, this young man that I was seeing by the name of Russ, who kept saying I need to see this other young man, Larry, and I kept refusing to go. I woke up in the middle of the afternoon to find this beautiful angel standing beside my bed. Aww. And she said, it's your choice. She said, you can live or you can die. And I just said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I said, just take me. And she disappeared. And the next thing I know, I'm floating up out of my body. And it was so exquisite. The love and the peace, I will never get over it. And I just remember lifting up out of my body, and I was about to go through the ceiling when all of a sudden I just stopped and I thought, I can't leave my husband to raise 2 teenagers by himself. He's on the road all the time. I can't do this. And I just remember floating at the ceiling and just saying, can I change my mind? And I just heard this soft chuckle back in my body. Next morning I wake up and I feel way better. And I just realized I have got to go and see this guy who does this thing. But there's no way I could drive because I can't sit up that long. So I make arrangements for the neighbor to take me because my husband's out of town, and make the appointment. And I have the appointment 2 days later. And she calls me up that morning to say, I can't take you because we've had the flu all night. And I thought, who gets the flu in July? And then my husband said, don't worry, I'll take you, I'll take you. And then the phone rings and he gets called out. Well, now what am I supposed to do? So I thought, fine, I'm going to drive myself. And I get in the car and I'm driving and I'm starting to pass out. And I finally just said, God, you want me there that badly? I said, then you damn well better get me there because I'm done. Next thing I know, I'm pulling into this guy's driveway. I have no memory of getting there, never been there before in my life. And here I am pulling into his driveway. And he worked in this big, beautiful old mansion. And you walked in the front, the big oak doors, and you walked into a hallway. And then the waiting room, there was a long hallway, and then there was a dining room to your left. And then that was connected to a living room that had been turned into a waiting room. And I remember there were chairs in the hallway, and I was too weak to make it to the waiting room. So I sat down in the hallway. And then I looked across to the dining room where this young man is working on somebody, and they're lying on a massage table. And he's doing this hand wavy thing over their body. And I thought, oh my God, I've driven all this way to see this kid who looked like he was 16 do this hand wavy thing. This is way outside of my purview. And I stood up and I was getting ready to leave and I heard sit, wait. And I was like, whoa, where did that come from? So I sat down and I thought, this is bizarre. Nobody's going to believe me. And then all of a sudden the front door opens up and there is a man in his 50s and a woman in her 80s, and they're carrying a woman in her 50s, and her leg is all bandaged up. And they place her in the chair across from me, and they start to unwrap her leg, and her leg is pitch black. I know gangrene when I see it, and I thought, good Lord, what is happening? And I said to this woman, shouldn't you be in the hospital? And she said, well, I've just been discharged. And she said, we're American. And she said, they want to amputate my leg, but if I agree to it, then she said, my 80-year-old mother has to sell her home. We have to sell our home, and we're going to lose our jobs, and we'll have to go on welfare. It's the only way we can afford the surgery. And I thought, good luck, lady. And she was called in before me, and he did the hand wavy thing. And then it was my turn, and I went in and he introduced himself. He said, hi, my name's Larry. He said, what seems to be the problem? I didn't tell him anything. I just said, I'm constipated and I get migraines. And he said, okay. And he did this little hand wavy thing on me, and it lasted maybe 2 minutes. And I just remember sitting up and thinking, he's changed my life. Like the minute he touched me, I just knew that everything was going to be all right. And when I sat up, the room did a spin, and he kind of grabbed me. And I said to him, I said, what's wrong with me? He said, well, you have celiac disease. And I thought, how does he know that? You know, he barely touched me. He's waving his hands over me. And he just says, yeah, you have celiac disease. I never told him they were suspecting me of that. And then 2 days later, I go in for this biopsy, and it's being done in the doctor's office. And when I came out of the anesthetic, the specialist said it was the worst case of undiagnosed celiac disease he'd ever seen in his entire 15-year career. He said, your doctor should have told me that you were this far gone. You should be in a hospital. I should never have done this in my office. And what celiac disease is, it is an autoimmune disorder where you cannot break down glutens like wheat and barley. And it affects the small intestine, and the small intestine should have fingers in it, like they're called villi. And these villi absorb nutrients. And he said that I didn't have anything. He said, the inside of your small intestine is smooth like the back of my hand. He says, there's nothing there. He said, how on earth you're even alive confounds him. He said, you're going to have to go on a very strict diet. And I said, you're going to have to do it immediately. And he says, it'll be 2 to 2.5 years minimum before you'll be strong enough to go back to work. Okay.
Wow.
So I end up going back to Larry's office every other week. And I go down for 2 days, and I book into a hotel, and you have 5 sessions a day with him. And then I would stay in a hotel. I'd sleep all night, get up the next morning, and go in for my next 5 sessions. I would have a session. I would go to my car. I would pass out. And I would always wake up just before it was time to wait for my next appointment. I went back every other week for 10 sessions for the next 3 months, and he had me back at work in 3 months.
Wow.
And I just, towards the end of the 3 months, I just remember one day he said, "So what do you do for a living?" And I just, well, I'm in corporate and I write training manuals and I really love my job. And he said, "Oh," he said, "you're really intuitive, you know?" And I went, "What?" He says, "You're really intuitive." And I said, "Well, okay. How do you know that?" Never told anybody about being intuitive. He said, "You could do what I do." And I went, "What? Are you nuts?" And I just said, "No way." And I remember going home and walking through the door and my husband looking at me and saying, "Wow," he says, "you look so much better." And I said, "I know. I really think this guy's onto something." And I said, "He wants to train me to do what he does." And my husband looked at me and he says, "What, is he nuts?" And I said, "Yeah, I think the guy's nuts." So, I kept going back, and I went back to work. And I knew that when I went back into work, that things had changed for me. My life was totally different. Now, I had always known that I was going to die in my 45th year. I had a vision when I was 8. I had prepared for my death. I wasn't afraid. I just didn't realize it would be a near-death experience that would change the way I died to myself and become a different person.
Right.
So I agreed to go in to do this training. I was curious, like, what is this hand wavy thing? And if he thinks I can do it, what have I got to lose? Let's go in and explore it. And the very first day of training, I just remember being just totally overwhelmed. There were 20 people. They were chiropractors, they were Reiki masters, they were naturopaths. They were people who had been doing healing work for 20 years. These were very highly dedicated and qualified professionals. And here's little Miss Corporate. And I just like, what am I doing here? I didn't even know how to muscle test. And so they're trying to teach me how to muscle test. And I'm doing this course with this guy. And I didn't like the way he wrote his training manual. I wrote training manuals for a living. When you're a lab tech, you work from training manuals. So I'm used to them being written a certain way. And I'm arguing with him constantly about, well, are you saying this? Are you saying that? And I'm writing it. It's all down. It took me a year to finish my training with him. I ended up rewriting his training manual. And I was surprised that even after the first lesson, people would come up to me and say, "Oh, will you work on me, Atherton? Will you work on me?" And I thought, what's wrong with these people? You've been doing this way longer than I have. Why are you asking me? And they said, no, you need to do this. You need to do this. You really know what you're doing. And I just thought, what's wrong with these people? And I argued with Larry constantly over the manual. We literally, we were at each other's throats through the whole training. I drove him crazy. He had me in tears every day in the training. I would go home and I would rewrite all his notes and bring them to him and say, you could do it this way. I was so arrogant.
Oh, you're just taking your different talents.
Yeah. So I decided to, so in order to get certified in this healing modality that he trained, which is called BOSS, which is a short form for Biocomputer Operating System, I needed to have volunteers. So I started, I found my volunteers and I started seeing them in the evening. I had them lying on my dining room table and I'm just doing the hand wavy thing. And people are going like, wow, this is really amazing. And I can't believe how much better I feel. And how did you know this? And the whole time I'm just like incredulous, like, how do I know this stuff, And then one day I just realized that I couldn't stay in my corporate job anymore. And I went to the CEO and I just said, things are really changing. There's a big change coming. And he just kind of looked at me. He said, how do you know that? And I said, I just know that there's a big change coming. And I said, I don't know what to do. And he said, get out. He says, do something else, get another job. So I said, okay, this is what I want. And I put together a severance package for myself. I said, you don't really need me anymore. I said, you need my assistant. And, she is a professionally trained technical writer. She's much better at this than I am. I'm just the manager of all these training groups, but she's your expert. So, you know, if you keep her and you let me go, then this is how much money you'll save. And this is how much money I would like to leave quietly. And so they said, okay.
Wow.
And I went home, and when I told my husband I wanted to do this full time, he just blanched and he just said, okay. So just promise me that if this doesn't work out in 3 months, that you'll go back and get a real job. So that was the agreement. So I just remember saying, okay, God, you got 3 months, make it happen 3 months, or I'm going back, you know, because I like that job, you know, it's the best job I ever had. I'm going back. And I remember that the very first month I had 1 client. And the very first day that I opened up my practice, I had 0 clients. And I remember sobbing and thinking, oh my God, what have I done? You know, like I'm such a fool for doing this. And the phone rang, and that was my 1 client. And she had heard about me from one of the volunteers, and she was desperate. So she said, and I said, okay. And I saw that 1 client for a month. And then within 3 months, I had a full-time practice, because she started talking to her friends, and their friends talked to their friends, and it just exploded.
Yeah. And
within 3 years, I was working 4 days a week. I was working 8-hour days. I was seeing 120 people a week. And then one day the angels came to me and they said, you're going to write a book. I thought, what? You know, like I'm just getting my feet wet here, you know, and I'm busy. Like, where am I going to find time to write a book? And yet over the next 5 years, I would be in a session with a client, and Archangel Michael would come in, or Archangel Gabriel would come in, and they would say, and this is for your book. I was like, okay. So then I would, you know, run off and I'd sit down and I'd write that night and write whatever had happened in that session. And then 5 years later, I woke up and Archangel Michael came to me in a meditation, and he says, it's time for you to publish your book. What? And he said, go into your computer. And sure enough, the book was there. I'd been writing the book for 5 years and I had no idea. And that was Following Body Wisdom. Couldn't get anybody interested in the book. So I self-published, and then that's fine. And then over the next 5 years, I kept hearing, you're going to write another book. And I just like, you know, like I self-published the first one. It cost a lot of money. Didn't really sell that well. I don't understand why I should write another book. But during the course of this, I noticed that I was starting to tell people how they could help themselves. And I put together something that I started calling the 3 simple things. And the first one was a meditation called the vertical axis that would help people to ground to heaven and earth. And then I would teach them how to cut cords with other people's energy, because, you know, we're energy, and we can pick up other people's energy like static. And, you know, over time, it just gets heavier and heavier. And doing cord cutting helped to clear this all off, and it made it much easier for people to feel much calmer. And then I would start to teach them how to manage the dream time, because when we sleep, we all leave our bodies and we all go into what's called the astral plane. And the astral plane is a very real place. And it's where we have the really funky things happen. You know, you are arguing with your sister, or you're having a fight with your mother over something that happened 10 years ago, or you walk into a bar and you see a dog having a beer with an elephant, you know, and it's where all the funky, weird stuff happens. It's where the nightmares happen. And what people don't realize is that there's 2 levels to the astral plane, and you can ask to be guided to the higher spiritual levels, where you can be guided by the divine, by God or the angels, and they will help you to solve certain problems. And I had been taught all of this through my experiences with clients, things that had happened to me in meditation, things that were happening to me in my practice, dream work. And I started putting it together. And then one day I decided that we needed to do a research study to validate that these 3 simple things were actually helping people, because people were saying that their quality of life was improving. They were sleeping better. They were finally eating better. They were exercising. It was changing their lives. So I got together with a colleague of mine who was a research scientist and a naturopath, and we designed this research study, and we had 30 volunteers. We had them do a questionnaire at the beginning, and at day 20 and at day 40. We measured their urine pH, their heart rate, and their blood pressure. And then we would have them do an emotional calculator. And at the end of 30 days, there was a 50% improvement in person, and up to a 50% emotional improvement in well-being for these people, which blew us away. I mean, I figured 20 to 30%, but not 50. And then one day I had this woman walk into my room, and she walks in with 2 canes, and she looks at me and she says, "Why haven't you written your next book?" And I thought, who are you?
Yeah.
You're a new client. Like, I don't even know who you are. And she said, "You need to write that next book, and you need to write it now." Just like, okay. And she said, and I used to be, she says, "I'm an English teacher." And she said, "I used to be an editor." She says, "I will edit your book for you."
Aww.
So I went into meditation, and I just said, "Okay, guys, if you want me to write this book, then I have a few demands." I said, "This time I want a publisher, and I want an editor, and I want an agent. And if I don't have those 3 things, then it's off the table. I'm sorry, you know, the demand is there, not doing it, because it's a lot of work to self-publish. And I had to pay an editor, and it cost us a lot of money. And so this lovely woman, she started drafting the first couple of pages. And then a colleague of mine that I had met in my very first training, she called me up one night, and she started telling me about the fact she was writing a book. And I said, "Oh, I'm getting to write a book too, but I haven't got an agent." She says, "Well, I have an agent." And I said, "Oh, you lucky thing, you." She said, "Well, I'll give her your name. Maybe she'll take you on." Okay. The next thing I know, I have an agent. And I put together this book, and she says, "Yeah, let's run with it." She sells it right away. And the next thing I know, I'm off and running and working with Llewellyn Publishers. And I have an editor and an agent.
That's awesome.
So it's just like,
awesome.
So it's been an amazing journey. It's an honor to do this work. I had people coming to me all the time and ask me to teach them. So I started, teaching people how to get in touch with their intuition. I started teaching people how to do intuitive journaling. And then I realized that I had developed this formula on how to create a business. And I'm just getting ready to launch that. I'm calling it the formula, and how to create a successful, thriving healing arts practice. And that'll be launched in October. Because, I was shown how to make my business grow very, very quickly, and it's been successful. And I have shared it with at least 5 other practitioners who all went on to establish themselves very quickly with healing practices within a year or 2. So, I feel that part of my mission is to help people on their healing journey. But the other part of my journey is also to share what I know and to help other people. And I meet women all the time, in particular, who are getting trained in the healing arts, but they don't know how to get started. What's the first steps? And we need to get more people out there, because I know that for myself and for my colleagues, we are getting way too busy. People are falling through the cracks of the medical system. They're just not getting their answers. They're not getting their needs met. And, energy medicine isn't the be all and the end all, just as I know I'm not the be all and the end all, but sometimes it's just enough to get you pointed in the right direction,
To bring things to the surface. The medical system has failed me as well. I love the mission that you're on, Atherton. I kept getting this quote, give a man a fish and he eats for a day, but teach him how to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime.
Exactly.
And I absolutely love how you are bringing that other component into what you're doing in this world, is to train up and other leaders and other healers to go on and continue to make a bigger ripple effect within our world. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I remember a teacher said to me once, she said that every teacher should be prepared to stand their post and look at the backs of their students.
Aww.
Yeah. And, I've trained a couple of healers, and they've said, well, we could do this better. We could do that better. Great. Do it. It's your job to be better than me, Yeah. And it's your job to expand on this, because, I know that I know what I know, but if you can do this and you can do it in a different way and you can help more people, thank you. Thank God,
Yeah, absolutely. That's been my prayer, because my husband and I have an accounting firm we've been running it for the last 18 years. And
yeah.
As I've been transitioning into my coaching practice, I was like, Lord, just bring me some women that like some people to take over my position in this company that will do a much better job than I ever have been able to.
Yeah.
And they're such humble ladies, but they are rock stars. And I am so grateful that they are going to take the company to a whole nother level. And I don't have to worry. I don't have to be a part of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, one thing that I do hear from people who are getting into the healing practice, they say they're worried that there's not enough to go around. And I remind them, having worked in doctors' offices, the doctors are only allowed to have 2,000 to 3,000 people on their roster. And when you think of how many people are out there, there is more than enough to go around. And God needs us out there. Otherwise, this wouldn't be happening. There wouldn't be this many people falling through the cracks if we were not needed. And there are a lot of women out there, but you have to hunt to find them, because we don't advertise. It's all word of mouth, and because you can't really trust what you hear in the media anymore, you're relying on that word of mouth. You're going to see somebody that your aunt or your grandmother or your cousin or your best friend has seen, because now you've got that one-on-one personal experience,
Yeah. I was referred to a naturopath back, 10 years ago now. I was 32. No, 12 years. Look at me, I'm aging. I was in excruciating pain. Like I felt like I had aliens running through my body and I had no energy. I would have to take a break 2 to 3 steps up. As I was going upstairs, I'd have to stop halfway and to catch my breath. I couldn't go for a walk. I had a toddler at the time and a preteen, and it was like I was a hot mess. And I went to the doctor. They're like, "Oh, you're premenopause." I'm like, if this is pre-menopause, like, you please shoot me, because I do not want to get into the full-fledged thing if this is like the prerequisite of it. Again, I had the same desire, just like, take me home already. Like, I just can't handle this pain anymore. I'm not one for medications. My mom was an addict, and I have a really hard time wrapping my head around them. And I was laying in bed. I'd probably eat whatever. It was like I was popping them like candy, Advil for migraines, a bottle of 64 every 2 days. And it wasn't even biting the pain. And I'm like, this can't be good for my liver. This can't be good for my liver. And someone referred us to go to a naturopath that did the muscle testing. Like, not a lot of people understand kinesiology or some of those healing arts.
Yes.
But asking your body what it needs and allowing we were there for 10 hours going through so many different testings, trying to figure out what was going on with me. And literally, because we were in a recession and the stress of everything that was coming onto our business, my body was screaming out like, we don't like this. And so it was in complete shutdown. Like my body was rejecting all the nutrients. Like, I was over 200 pounds, but showing up anorexic because I was malnutritioned, because my body just wasn't receiving anything. I was getting the headaches, the pain that was running through my body was my blood was all caked together. It wasn't free floating like it's supposed to be. I was 3 points away from needing a pacemaker because my heart was working like so hard. And it was a challenge, but through kinesiology, the muscle testing, trying to figure out what my body truly needed, nutritional wise, like, you had to kind of like rebuild, like overload the reserves. And even now to this day, I sometimes will go get nutritional injections so that I can get my nutrients right into my bloodstream without my body saying, no, we don't like this. Even though, like, I know you need it, but I don't want it today.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's such important work that, and like you said, it's not advertised. Like, it's not out in the mainstream. People are like, oh, what does your doctor say? Well, your experience of that doctor, like, is she still practicing? Because God have mercy.
Yeah, no, she's still practicing, and every once in a while we used to live in Guelph, and that's where that doctor practices. And every once in a while, I'd run into a client who had her as a family physician, and they'd be losing their minds. And I would just say, you need to find a different physician, because this is what happened to me. And they go, yeah, she doesn't listen. She just gives you drugs. She just wants to give you drugs. Look at all the drugs I'm on. And it's like, no, this is not how you do this. I mean, when we lived in Guelph, we owned the Paradigm Center for Wellness. I opened up I went from 0 clients to opening up a healthcare center. And I worked with 7 amazing colleagues. It was just so amazing. And we had this beautiful century-old building. And even how we got that building was a story unto itself. You know, the hands of God is just, you know, imprints are all over this. And I just remember, you know, people would come to me and they would say, well, you know, I told my doctor that I'm seeing you. And so the joke was around the office was, if you see Atherton and you seeing that woman, you're going to get discharged from your practice, because there were doctors in town saying, you know, if I find out that you're seeing that woman, I'm kicking you out of my practice, which they can't do. It's not legal. Wow. And then all of a sudden, I had clients coming to me and saying, well, you know, so I told my doctor about you. I hope that was all right. It's like, yeah, okay. How did it go? You know, I'm waiting for the story. And they would say, hey, you know, if it's working, go. And then I found that cancer patients, their oncologists were saying, okay, so this is what we're going to do. And, you know, you need to get, you know, find the Reiki, you know, do Reiki, do therapeutic touch, you know, do meditation, see a nutritionist, see a naturopath, whatever you can do to get yourself through the chemo and the radiation, you got to do. And it's just like, wow, this is amazing. I love this. And then ever so rarely, I'd get a doctor who would actually refer to me, you know? And then I started seeing social workers, and I started seeing therapists, and I had a couple of psychiatrists come to see me, because they didn't realize that they were carrying all of their clients in their energy fields. And I was having to clean that all out and get them back into their center so that they could function, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense, especially for the people that are hearing all of the heaviness of other people's journey. Because I find that I attach myself quite quickly. Like, I wasn't the one that would bring home lost puppies as a kid. I would bring home lost kids as a kid. and that is just dysfunction in its own, knowing the dysfunction that I lived in. I'm like, oh, like, if your life is messed up, come see mine. Like, I don't know what I was thinking, because it was not like it was a better, you know, grass is greener on the other side of the fence kind of environment. But I always felt like I needed to do something in the world, and everyone's like, oh, you should be psychology or go into that field. I'm like, I just can't, social work or any of that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I can't, because I attach. Like, social work I could never do, because I'm like, I would go into an environment and I wouldn't even listen to the rules. I would just put those little babies under my arms and I would run for the hills. Yeah. Exactly. I couldn't do it, unfortunately. So, cutting those, I look at that as soul ties, because I look at that even in my marriage, like any relationships that I had previous to my commitment to my marriage. I've had to cut those ties so that I'm not bringing that energy or those relationships or those ideas of comparison into my marriage. And so there's a lot of value in cutting that, those ties. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and, you know, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just curious, like, when you do that work with people, like, what are some of the biggest impacts that you've seen of people, like, being released from the weight of all those ties?
Well, with the cord cutting in particular, what I found is in situations where the daughter hasn't talked to the mother in years, all of a sudden it's opened the door to healing. Siblings who haven't been able to ever really get along, all of a sudden there's an understanding. In some cases, the situation is irreparable, but the person is finally at peace with that, and they're able to let it go and to let that person go. When you're dealing with women who've been in abusive relationships, it's just gives them room to breathe again. They can finally face them in court. They can finally make the changes. They can finally leave. You know, I end up working with some women who've been horrifically abused, and they've been trying for years to leave. You do cord cutting, and all of a sudden they can walk out the door and take the kids with them.
Oh.
I worked with one situation where it was an abusive marriage, and the kids wanted to stay with the father, and the mother just knew that if she didn't get out, it was going to kill her, so she left. And then we just worked together for the next 10 years, and eventually all the children came to live with her. But it took a long time. Sometimes with cancer patients, you've got to help them cut cords with cancer. There's usually a lot of anger with cancer, not in every case. I don't want to stereotype that, cancer is an anger thing, but there can be a deep-seated anger or rage that's there. And when you cut that cord with that, then the chemo and radiation becomes so much easier, So I would have to say that that's the most dramatic is how the changes in relationship that can happen so quickly with cord cutting.
I love it. That is so powerful, because relationships is definitely the most valuable asset that we have in our life, right? The most valuable, and it's who we get to pass our legacy on, who we get to pass our dreams and visions on is to our kids. And I come from a really dysfunctional family. Like, I was born an addict, and I'm a product of prostitution. My mom had crazy amounts of abuse in her life, and she didn't know how to be in a relationship without abuse being a part of the equation. She thought that was how she received love. Like, oh, he loves me. Like, all these bruises is his love. Like, that, she didn't say it in so many words, but that was how she perceived it. And I just refused. I was like, no way. Like, when I had my first child, I'm like, I need to cut this. I need to draw the line in the sand and change it for the next generations. And gosh, I have made a heck of a mess, like, trying to do that. But I'm hoping that the work that I've done in my personal journey, that my next generation, like my kids, are going to take that change to a whole nother level moving forward.
Well, and I've always been told that in meditation, whatever healing the mother does, she's also healing the children. So you may not see immediate effects of that, but it changes the family dynamic by all means. So and I've seen evidence of that for years. So that's heartwarming, because I look at my daughter. She's 24 now, and she is like strong, very like concrete in her opinions. She's sharp as a whip. She's just like and confident. Like, I love the fact that she just has this knowing of who she is, and she's not ashamed to put it out there. I love that. It's taken me years to get to a place of just knowing my value and worth, and I'm still working on it. I don't even know if I fully arrived to that freedom space, but it's a journey. I always teasing my clients and saying, well, I'm still waiting to grow up.
I love that.
Maybe someday I'll get there. But, I remember my mother saying to me that it's every parent's responsibility to do one better than their parents. And I think you need to give yourself credit for being able to see that and saying, this is not what I want, and to choose differently. And that's huge. Because a lot of people don't think that they have that choice. They think that they're a victim of circumstance, and they get embroiled in that. And I deal with that in my practice too. People feel that they don't have any choice. If my father drank, well, then, it's only natural that I would drink. My father was an alcoholic, and he had 3 wives and 8 kids. And what I find really phenomenally amazing is not one of us are alcoholics. None of us. And so it's just fascinating how we all made this choice to, as much as we loved our dad, we knew that we could choose differently. And that's the power of insight, and then we end up raising kids who are very independent, and they don't have to suffer through the traumas that we suffered through, because, we can lament the traumas that we've been through, but on the other hand, they've made us stronger. It's it's why we're here. We've had to go through those experiences and overcome them so that we can help other people see their way through that. And I'm sure you find that in your counseling practice, that so many of your experiences will come up with clients and it's like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. And then you are more believable, you're more relatable because you've had the similar experience. You know what it means to have a parent who's an alcoholic or a drug addict, right?
Yeah.
So you can understand.
I remember when my daughter was in high school, I was driving her to school one morning and she's like, Mom, because I've always been really transparent about my story and my journey. And, because she was watching me going through all my healing stuff and it was like, girl,
yeah,
I had to let her know what I was working through. Right. And so she asked me, Mom, if you could go back and change anything about your past, what would you change? And the way her question came out, she was like confident that there would be something, like she was waiting for an answer.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what, honey, in the midst of it, I would have rewrote the whole story.
Yeah.
But knowing who I am today and knowing how that has all shaped who I am, I can't change a thing. I wouldn't change a thing. Just knowing that journey has brought me to this place of compassion and empathy and understanding so much hurt that others feel because I've been through so much. I often say to my kids, I'm like, I have a PhD in life theology. Like I've been through a lot.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I like that.
So it's a journey, and we do often want to like, oh, I wish I could have done that different, or I wish that would never have happened to me. And like you said, being a victim of circumstance, but we can be victorious over all of those things. We can choose that mindset over the victim mindset, and we can be empowered knowing that those are just like the journey. Like I remember wrestling with God. I'm like, God, you said you love me. Like, you know, the beginning and the middle and the end of my life. And you knit me together in my mother's womb. And you obviously knew that she was an addict. So why the heck did you give me to that family?
Yeah.
And he's like, his response to me was like, well, who else? I needed you to be the strong tower, because I always felt like I was different. I was like the ugly duckling. I was like Cinderella, like, you know, all the negative annotations of the family. Like I was always the burden. And but God's like, no, you were the lighthouse. You were the one that my mom used to pull me out of bed in the middle of the night and sit me at the kitchen table didn't matter if it was a weeknight or not, just to talk out her pain. And I would just sit there and listen. And and who else could have done that? Like God created me to have the listening ears and the heart and compassion just to be present and be available for her. So
yeah,
God is good. He is
so
good.
Exactly.
Well, Atherton, I really truly appreciate you sharing your story and your journey with us today. If somebody in the audience is hearing this message today, and they want to get in touch with you, how could they do that?
They can go to my website, www.athertondrenth.ca, and that's spelled ATHERTONDRENTH.com. And they can reach me that way and make a submission. And then they can find out what courses we're teaching and what other lovely things I've been up to. So.
Well, I'm excited to watch you as you continue to train trainers and shift into that realm. I'm sure you won't be needing much of the one-on-one except for like, hey, I just missed it, you know, you're making a much bigger ripple in this world. And I'm really honored to have you come and share your story and to be able to get to know you and just to hear how God, you know, the newspaper and then how you managed to get to Larry's house totally unconsciously.
Yeah.
That is just a miracle all in itself. And so, and just how you were pulled and drawn into this space. It's so powerful. I love it.
Well, thank you. And I think that what you're doing with the app and getting these stories out to other women is just a beautiful thing. So, you know, thank you for doing that, because Lord knows we need it.
Yeah, well, encourage and inspire. And how better else to do it is by sharing our trials and our tribulations and how we've managed to find some form of success and continue to I don't think we ever arrive at some bar of success. I think that it's a journey. We're always striving to become a better person in society. And so, it's all part of the journey.
Always growing, always
Always
right?
growing, yes. Well, thank you, darling. I very much appreciate your time with me today. And I do look forward to staying in contact.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Take care.
You as well.